Rory, what is vicarious trauma, and why, as a counselling student, do we need to know this?
Vicarious trauma is trauma that a helper can experience when listening to or working with clients who are traumatised. So in every walk of life, certainly in professional services, in emergency services, they'll be going to very traumatic incidents where people may be hurt or unwell, or bomb incidents or plane crashes. But also, just generally, if you're a therapist, you hear some very difficult stories that people tell of their lives. And what can happen is those stories can stick with you and traumatise you. It's a form of secondary trauma, is probably the best way to describe it, trauma by association. And when I did my research as a student, as an undergraduate, I did it on post-traumatic stress, and I studied the incident in Bhopal in India, the Union Carbide factory. It was a battery factory that had a terrible fire and explosion. And it did two things. First of all, it identified that anybody can get post-traumatic stress. And also, there was a lot of vicarious trauma. So families of those affected, people in the area who weren't even involved in the explosion, they became traumatized. So trauma by association. And in terms of the student experience, even as students in skills practice, you may hear someone who talks about something that's very difficult, and you might find yourself not being able to get to sleep, maybe imagining what's happened to this person, and maybe being a bit fearful that this could happen to you. And that would be vicarious trauma, and it can happen at any stage of training.
Yeah, it's a really interesting phenomenon. So it transfers itself from one to another. And what's interesting with vicarious trauma, it doesn't have to be a person-to-person interaction. You can experience vicarious trauma from watching the news and what you're left with and how that feels to you. And it may well trigger something that might have happened to you or nearly happened to you, or may have happened to a family member or somebody that you know. And suddenly it takes you out of the present moment of being in that simulated skills session, if you're at college and somebody mentions something, and you're somewhere else for a brief moment and maybe experiencing emotions inwardly that are not yours. It's vicariously brought up by what's been spoken about. And trauma is not always some incredibly tragic event that has happened. It could be something that nearly happened, or something that you imagined might happen in your own life, and then somebody else mentioning something many years later can trigger that. And I'm going to give you an example of this now. So we're going to say we're in a triad now. There's 3 people. We're broken up in our skills practice group, and our job is to work together and do 15 minutes each, one person watching, one being the speaker, one being the listener, and to swap around. Maybe somebody speaks about something really low level. As the speaker, I might speak about my trip in to the university today and how I was driving and it was really busy, and I got quite angry because somebody cut me off. They cut in front of me. It may well be that the person that is the observer, not even the listener, might have had an incident within their life where they were in a car accident, and it can bring it back right there and then. They're transported back to that moment, and they can experience vicarious trauma through that. So it's not necessarily a really heavy topic that has to be brought. It can be anything, really. It's amazing how our neurons in our brain work. We hear one thing and it fires off a series of neurons, and it links to a memory or something that we heard once or experienced once, and we can be vicariously traumatized through that. And of course, we can see that in clients. If you are maybe in placement practice and you're seeing clients, they can be vicariously traumatized by what's going on in their family, to their family members. They may even be bringing that to counseling with their troubles with what is happening to someone else, maybe a friend or something like that. So understanding what it is a very good starting point. And of course, we want to watch out for ourselves as the carers, and including while we're studying, that we don't experience that ourselves, or if we recognize that might be playing out in somebody else in our skills group or personal development group, or just a classroom discussion. It can show itself in so many ways that we're maybe able to identify that and label it as vicarious trauma. We wouldn't say that out loud, but to identify it. And then what might we do, Rory? If it was myself and I'm the observer in this triad and somebody speaks about being cut off and being angry on the way to work, and I'm now taken back to time where I was in an accident and I'm feeling that, what might we do?
I think if the listener, the person who's doing the listening, starts to get unwell or agitated or maybe tearful, I've seen that happen. I've seen that people have been listening to someone's story and all of a sudden they become very tearful and they look like they're actually there. I think we've all witnessed a person who's talking about something and you can see that they're literally there. They're experiencing it as if they were there. And the same thing can happen with someone who's listening. That's the vicarious element. And what you can do is, first of all, remind that person that they're safe. That's the first thing, because when people start to go into a cycle of trauma, what usually happens is they're transported into the past. Now, in case of vicarious trauma, it's a imagination of what's happened. So they're not experienced it themselves, or they may experience something like that, but almost certainly they will be catapulted into the past. So it's really essential to try and bring the person into the here and now. And you can do that a number of ways. Just have a bit of a chat and say, are you okay? You look a little bit disconnected. Do you know where you are? It might sound a very strange thing to ask, but sometimes just asking that question engages the top of the brain and will bring that person back into the here and now. And of course, if someone is quite unwell with it, there's a couple of things you could do. You could ask them to look at an object in a room, explain what the object looks like, what it sounds like. You can point to a chair and say, tell me about that chair. Tell me what would happen in that chair. So you're taking people out of the past. You could do something called square breathing, where you ask the person to inhale, count to 4, exhale, count to 4, inhale, count to 4, exhale, count to 4. And that steadies the nervous system. It arrests the body going into a traumatic cycle. And of course, if you are a student, get the assistance of the tutor if someone is really unwell. Sometimes just asking someone to go for a walk down the corridor can do it, because they're engaging other parts of the body. So one of the things I'd used in my therapy room was, if a client was struggling, I'd get them to tap the hands maybe, or stamp the feet, so that, again, that top brain starts to work and starts to lift them out of the part of the brain where the trauma is. Or you could do something called a butterfly hug. You cross your arms and put your palms onto your chest and just tap your body. And again, what happens is it arrests the physiological parts of the body that go into trauma. It just settles them and quietens them down. I would say that if someone is in that situation, there may be stuff that's gone on in their past that they could do with looking at or being supported in therapy. But those are just some of the things. I don't know about you, Ken, but certainly in skills practice, I've seen people literally go grey when they've been listening to someone's story. And I've had to step in and say, oh, okay, I think just take a bit of a break here, focus on the person who's struggling. What do you need? And in one case, the person sat for about a third of the lesson in the canteen just with a cup of coffee, just to bring themselves down a bit. It does happen, and we have to protect ourselves. And I guess if we're in a teaching situation, our peers, if we can recognise it, we can help.
Yeah, nicely said, Rory. So you spoke there about square breathing, butterfly hug, describing something in the room. These are all grounding techniques. But you now understand vicarious trauma, what to look out for, what it might feel like if that starts playing out in yourself. And I want to clarify, when I was speaking, it can kick off things that you may have experienced or someone else may have experienced, but it can also just come out of nowhere. It can be their story and you have no reference or experience of that at all. And like you said, Rory, you're imagining yourself into that, or what it might have been like that for that person, like watching or listening to the news and thinking about those poor people and how that must have been for them, and then experiencing trauma within yourself. You have those grounding techniques, and as Rory quite rightly said there, break that session, because in real therapy, you're a qualified therapist working with a client. If that client becomes traumatized, you don't carry on. You're going to check if they're okay.
Yeah.
And maybe step out of your modality and your main model. So the same within your training environment. If that is playing out, it's okay to just stop and check that person is okay and what they need, because at the end of the day, we're there for the best service of the clients. And if it's you, say, you know what, I can't go on anymore, this is what's playing out in me, and then speak to your tutor or work with a grounding technique or something like that. I think it's really important to recognize it, not to hide it, not to, oh, this is silly, I shouldn't really feel like this. You are feeling like that, or they are feeling like that, and we respect those feelings and work with them as best we can. And the truth is, trauma is a specialist training and not always taught at any great level within counselling training.
Just to link to what you said earlier, Ken, empathy. When we work with clients, we work in an empathic way, work in their frame of reference. But as we always used to say in my training groups, try and put yourself in someone else's shoes, but leave your socks on. Leave enough of yourself to be able to come back from the client's story and reintegrate with self. That's really important. What we're understanding now is that trauma isn't about war or very serious threats to life. It can be about everyday experiences where someone feels threatened and they just can't get that out of their head.